All right, welcome back to OpenLine. We are talking about human trafficking tonight, especially how it affects minority communities right here in Tennessee. And I want you to hear that because it is happening in Tennessee day in and day out. We have some wonderful ladies. If you have questions about this, please ask them tonight. 615-737+. Margie Quin is joining us from End Slavery. Dr. Laura-Ferguson Mimms from the Link Corporation. We really appreciate you both being here. We ended last segment and I said I wanted to pick right back up with how does human trafficking, sex trafficking particularly, affect the minority community?
Yeah, I will punt to Margie in just a moment, but I think one of the things that really piqued our interest is when we look at the overall population of the United States, when we look at people of African descent, we're approximately 12 to 13% of the total population of the United States. Yet when we look at trafficking victims, 40% identify as Black.
Wow.
So there's this huge overrepresentation of Black. When we look at the overall Latinx population in the United States, it's about 18%. But when we look at the trafficked population, the Latinx population is about 24%. So when we're seeing those disparities, we know that there's more work to be done around amplifying the issue, bringing awareness and advocacy.
So Margie, what is happening under the layer there, you know, deep down? Why is this the case?
Yeah, I think when you have populations who are disproportionately impacted by things like poverty, incarceration or over-incarceration, mental illness, substance abuse, you know, but that poverty issue is a big one. Lack of education, parents who are incarcerated or who are mentally ill. We see this as a generational issue of violence, similar to domestic violence. We see generations of women trafficked. So mother, grandmother, daughter. That's not uncommon, unfortunately. And so when we talk about sort of breaking that cycle, that's what we're trying to talk about doing at End Slavery Tennessee with our 2-year now residential programming. We've got to break that cycle because so many of the women that come to us also have children, children that are living with family members, children that are in state's custody. And so we've got to break that cycle or it's just going to continue to repeat and repeat.
Because it becomes a way of life. It becomes normal.
It's
Children
normalized.
say, this is how it is.
Right, that's exactly right.
And just how backwards is that? How sad and dangerous.
Yes, and we also see that same behavior normalized in men. And so the trafficking behavior, the exploitive behavior, the violence, domestic violence behavior is also generational. And I think that's pretty clear in all the science and data is that violence in the home will beget violence, you know, for the children. And so I think all of these issues, unfortunately, also, as we keep saying, disproportionately impact, you know, Black and brown kids.
One thing that you have brought up is mother, father, sister, brother. Sex trafficking usually is not involving a stranger. Explain that.
So we see a lot of it starts in the home, and it either starts as early childhood sexual abuse in the home by a family member. Could be a father, a stepfather, an uncle, an older brother, a cousin, and then that unmitigated early childhood sexual abuse then turns into sex trafficking. It creates issues around mental illness and self-esteem. It can lead to substance abuse, which is a coping mechanism for women who've experienced sexual violence, and so that can trigger it. Or we see, unfortunately, parents or guardians trafficking young children. And so the youngest referral we've had this year is 6 years old. And so we know that there are, and it's, the further east you go, the more prevalent it becomes. And it's systemic sometimes in communities and in impoverished families. And a lot of that's, it's not just urban. We're talking about very rural populations as well. You know, all the data and the studies that we've done here in the state tell us that trafficking impacts rural communities every bit as much, frankly, if not more, than urban populations.
Really?
Yes.
Is it because it's easier to hide?
You just have fewer resources in rural communities. You do have poverty, a lot of poverty in rural communities. And it's just more spread out, and there just is not as many eyes on these kids, which is why we think in the pandemic we saw this real upsurge in abuse and trafficking of children, because they weren't going to school, they weren't being seen, the counselor wasn't seeing them, a teacher wasn't seeing them, a doctor wasn't seeing them, a dentist wasn't seeing them. They weren't anywhere where they could be observed, and so we missed opportunities to refer children who were potentially being trafficked.
And during the pandemic, so many people were behind a screen, whether it be a phone, a computer, whatever it be. Both victims and perpetrators.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the TBI has reported that the numbers of cyber tips from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children just exploded, like by hundreds of %, because all these juveniles were online.
Which should be a big red flag and a siren for parents. Like, you've got to pay attention.
Right.
Even if you think you have a good child, you don't know
it's not
who's
about your
on the
good
other
child.
end.
It's not about that.
It's not. You're a parent.
Which is why we're, a parent 3 times over, which is why documentaries like this Surviving Sex Trafficking and partnering with organizations such as End Slavery Tennessee is so vitally important, not just for communities of color, that's our interest, but for all communities, because as parents, sometimes you don't know the signs and symptoms to look for.
I mean, there's a lot to keep up with. We all know that. And it goes so quick. You're always playing catch up as a parent.
Absolutely.
You have seen this documentary.
Yes, it is riveting.
What were your initial takeaways?
I think initially speechless.
And not in a good way.
Not in a good way at all. I don't want to tell too much, because we really want people to come out and see the documentary and start this conversation. And as I said, even if you're not able to come on Thursday, to reach out to us, and we're happy to bring the documentary to you, to your organization, because we want it to be the start of a dialogue. So many times you can see a documentary, you're moved, it's riveting, and you leave and you do nothing.
Yes.
That's exactly what we don't want to happen.
What do you hope will happen?
We hope that it will cause this swell,
I'll help you out.
Help me, groundswell
in the future.
of concern that compels us to action. That is our hope. That is the whole impetus behind this, is to amplify the message and to really compel people to advocacy.
Well, let's talk about that advocacy, that action. What can I do, Margie? What is important for just little old me in the middle of this big old world to do?
Yeah, I think that's where the panel comes in. So we'll have this panel right after, and we'll have great folks like Judge Anna Escobar, who is the judge over the trafficking court in Davidson County, the Sergeant Mac Dixon over the human trafficking unit at Metro PD, Stacia Freeman, who is the CEO of Epic Girl. All of these folks are going to be on the panel, and they are Sheila Simpkins from Thistle Farms. All of these folks are going to be able to tell you exactly how you can get involved. Everything from, hey, just sharing it on your social media, sharing it from legitimate sources, so not the crazy conspiracy theory stuff that's out there, but actually, legitimate sources of information. Hey, share it. Tell your friend. Go to coffee with a friend and say, hey, I saw this documentary and it really moved me, and tell a friend about it. Or volunteer. Or give money. Or any one of those things. You can get as involved probably as you want to be.
There's the need.
But you can stand on the sideline and write checks. Happy to take checks. But there are ways for every single person to get involved. You do not have to wring your hands and think, oh, I wish I could do something. You can do something.
Okay, we're going to go to break on that statement because that's powerful. When we come back, we're going to be talking about Margie's new role, moving into DCS. And again, we encourage you to call in with questions tonight. Stay right there. We're coming right back.